You've done it again. Someone said something, maybe a comment, maybe a look, maybe just a silence that felt like judgment. And before you even realized it, you started explaining yourself. You justified your choices, you defended your boundaries, you softened your words so they wouldn't misunderstand you. And when it was over, you felt something strange. Not relief, not clarity, just exhaustion. Here's what nobody tells you. The moment you begin explaining yourself to someone who never intended to understand you, you have already lost something. Something quiet, something essential. Your energy. And today, we're going to talk about why you keep doing it, what it's actually costing you, and how to stop for good. Think about the last time you over-explained yourself. Maybe it was to a friend who always finds a reason to question your choices. Maybe it was to a family member who has never changed their opinion of you, no matter how many times you tried to show them who you really are. Maybe it was at work, to someone who had already decided what your intentions were before you even opened your mouth. And somewhere inside, you knew. You knew the explanation would not change anything. You knew they were not listening to understand. They were listening to find a weakness in your defense. But you explained anyway. You searched for the perfect sentence, the perfect tone, the perfect amount of vulnerability. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that if people do not understand you, it must be your fault. You learned that if you could just become clearer, softer, more reasonable, more patient, then maybe they would finally see you. But people who are committed to misunderstanding you do not need better explanations. They need you to keep explaining. Because as long as you are explaining, they remain in the position of judge, and you remain in the position of someone asking to be approved. That is the hidden trap. Over-explaining feels like honesty, but often it is fear disguised as honesty. It feels like communication, but often it is self-abandonment disguised as communication. You are not trying to be understood. You are trying to feel safe. And that is why it exhausts you. Psychological truth. The more you try to control how others perceive you, the less grounded you become in your own reality. Over-explaining does not create safety. It creates dependency. Because every time you explain yourself to someone who refuses to understand, you teach your nervous system that your peace depends on their approval. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And patterns can be broken. But first, you need to understand what is actually happening when you over-explain. Because it is not as simple as just stop. There is something deeper going on, something most people never see in themselves. In the next part, we will talk about the real reason you explain, and why it has almost nothing to do with the other person. Here is the uncomfortable truth. When you explain yourself to someone who does not deserve it, you are not really talking to them. You are talking to an older version of yourself. The version that learned that being understood meant being safe. The version that learned that silence in a room meant danger. The version that believed love had to be earned through clarity, obedience, and emotional performance. So, your nervous system made a private agreement with the world. If I can explain myself well enough, I will not be abandoned. If I can make them understand, I will be safe. If I can prove that I am not selfish, not difficult, not wrong, then maybe I will be allowed to exist in peace. But that agreement no longer protects you. It keeps you trapped. Because you are no longer a child trying to survive the emotional weather of other people. You are an adult. And not every misunderstanding is a threat. Not every disapproval is abandonment. Not every silence needs to be filled with your defense. Most people imagine despair as something dramatic, but sometimes despair is quiet. Sometimes it looks like a person calmly explaining why their boundary is reasonable. Sometimes it looks like saying yes while your entire body is asking you to stop. Sometimes it looks like becoming understandable at the cost of becoming untrue. And every time you over-explain, you reinforce the old survival system. You tell your subconscious, the opinions of others are more important than my own. Their interpretation matters more than my inner knowing. Their approval is the price I must pay to feel safe. But here is what changes everything. The people who have stopped needing to explain themselves did not become cold. They did not become arrogant. They became free. And there are 3 specific moments, 3 quiet patterns, where most people give their power away without realizing it. The first is when you justify your boundaries. The second is when you defend yourself to people who have already decided. And the third is when you seek permission for decisions that were already yours to make. That is where we go next. The first pattern is the most common. You set a boundary, someone pushes back, and suddenly you are no longer standing inside your boundary. You are standing outside of it, trying to convince someone else that it is reasonable. You explain why you need space, why you are tired, why you cannot do it this time, why your no does not mean you do not care. But here is what you need to understand. A boundary is not a debate. A boundary is information. It tells another person where your capacity ends. And the moment you begin defending your limit to someone who does not respect it, you have already allowed them to treat your boundary as an opening offer. This is why no feels so terrifying to people who are trained to please. Because no does not come with decoration. It does not perform. It does not apologize for existing. It simply closes the door. And some people will call that cold because they benefited from you leaving the door half open. Psychological truth. A boundary becomes weaker the moment it is presented as a debate. The more reasons you give to someone who does not respect your limit, the more material you give them to negotiate with. Stop arguing for your own limits. The people who respect you may not always like your boundary, but they will recognize your right to have one. The people who demand endless explanations are often not looking for understanding. They are looking for the weak point. And your silence does not make the boundary cruel. It makes it clear. The second pattern is more painful because it usually involves people whose opinion still touches something vulnerable in you. A parent, a friend, a partner, someone you once trusted. You try to explain your perspective, but no matter how careful you are, they twist it. You say you are hurt. They say you are too sensitive. You say you need space. They say you are abandoning them. You say you are changing. They say you think you are better than everyone else. And still, you keep trying. Because part of you believes that if you can just find the perfect words, they will finally see the real you. But some people do not want to understand you. They want to be right about you. They have built a version of you that protects them from having to look at themselves. And every explanation you give them becomes more material to distort, more words to twist, more vulnerability to use, more proof that they still know how to move you. This is why silence can be so powerful. Not the silence of punishment, not the silence of resentment, the silence of someone who has finally understood the room. The silence of someone who refuses to participate in a conversation designed to keep them defending themselves forever. Your silence does not prove them right. It proves that your peace has become more important than their narrative. In these moments, silence is not defeat. Silence is precision. The third pattern is the subtlest, and because it looks harmless, it often drains you the most. You make a decision. You feel it in your body. You know what you need to do. You decide to leave, to begin, to stop. to change direction, to choose something different. And then, almost automatically, you begin explaining it to people who never asked. You present your decision like a case. You list your reasons. You show your logic. You defend the future before anyone has even questioned it. This is preemptive explaining, and what it really says is, I do not fully trust myself yet. Because when you trust yourself, you do not need to build a courtroom around every decision. You can let a choice exist. You can let your life move before everyone understands the direction. You can accept that some people will only understand your choices after they see the results, and some will never understand them at all. That is not always a tragedy. Sometimes it is the price of becoming yourself. It looks like becoming less available. It looks like choosing a road that others would not have chosen for you. And because of that, you will be tempted to explain every step. But every time you seek permission for a decision that was already yours to make, you delay your own becoming. The decision was already made. The wisdom was already there. What you were looking for, approval, reassurance, permission, those are things you have to learn to give yourself. And the moment you do, something begins to change. The need to explain starts to disappear. In the next part, we stop talking about the pattern and we talk about the practice. How do you actually stop explaining yourself without becoming cold, defensive, or detached from the people who truly matter? So how do you stop? Not by becoming silent all the time, not by refusing to communicate, not by turning yourself into a wall. You stop by learning the difference between explanation and self-betrayal. Because explanation is not the enemy. Explaining yourself to someone who loves you, respects you, and genuinely wants to understand can be an act of intimacy. It can repair, it can clarify, it can bring two people closer. But explaining yourself to someone who repeatedly uses your vulnerability to question your worth is not intimacy. It is leakage. It is your energy leaving your body through a door you keep opening. So the practice begins with one pause. The next time you feel the urge to explain, do not speak immediately. Pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, is this person trying to understand me? Or are they trying to make me defend myself? That question can save you years of emotional exhaustion. Because when someone wants to understand, your explanation lands somewhere. It creates softness, it creates clarity, it creates movement. But when someone only wants control, your explanation does not land. It circles, it gets challenged, it gets distorted, it gets used to pull you deeper into the conversation. The second practice is this: let misunderstanding exist. This may be the hardest thing you ever learn, because if you have spent your life managing other people's perception of you, being misunderstood can feel like danger. It can feel like leaving a wound uncovered. But not every misunderstanding is your responsibility. Some people misunderstand you because they lack context. Some misunderstand you because they lack emotional maturity. And some misunderstand you because understanding you would require them to change the story they prefer. You cannot correct all of that, and you will destroy your peace trying. Psychological truth. Self-respect begins when you can tolerate being misunderstood without rushing to correct the image someone has of you. The need to be understood by everyone is often the last chain of approval seeking. Let them have the incomplete version. Let them have the version that makes them comfortable. Let them have the story where they are right. You do not have to live inside it. The third practice is to redirect the energy inward. Every explanation you do not give becomes energy you get to keep. Energy for your work, energy for your body, energy for your future, energy for the relationships where your words are actually received. This is how a person becomes powerful quietly, not by winning every argument, but by no longer entering arguments that require them to abandon themselves. Not by proving everyone wrong, but by building a life so rooted in self-knowledge that other people's misunderstanding no longer has the power to move the center. You do not need everyone to see you clearly. You need to see yourself clearly enough that their confusion does not become your crisis. That is freedom. Something changes when you stop over-explaining. At first, it feels uncomfortable. You may feel rude, cold, distant, wrong, because for years your nervous system confused explanation with safety. But then, slowly, something else begins to happen. The people who only valued your availability begin to lose interest. The people who needed you to defend yourself in order to feel powerful begin to drift away. The people who mistook your kindness for unlimited access begin to reveal themselves. Not dramatically, quietly. They simply stop taking up as much space in your mind. And the space they leave begins to fill with something you may not have felt in a long time. Clarity, calm, dignity. You begin to realize how much of your life was being spent in invisible defense, preparing explanations, softening truths, rehearsing conversations, trying to make your decisions acceptable to people who would never live with the consequences. And when that stops, you get your mind back. You get your silence back. You get your direction back. You start to realize that explaining yourself was never really about them. It was about the part of you still waiting for permission, permission to choose, permission to leave, permission to become someone they might not recognize, permission to exist without being translated into something easier for others to accept. But the permission was never theirs to give. It was yours. It always was. And the day you stop asking for it, the world may not applaud. Some people may misunderstand you. Some may call you distant. Some may say you changed. And they may be right. You did change. You stopped making your inner life available for public debate. You stopped turning your boundaries into essays. You stopped handing your peace to people who did not know how to hold it. That is not arrogance. That is not coldness. That is self-respect returning to the body. And when self-respect returns, your silence feels different. It no longer feels like fear. It feels like home. You don't owe anyone an explanation for becoming who you are. If this message reached the part of you that is tired of defending your own existence, write this in the comments. I owe no explanation. Not for me, for yourself. As a small act of taking back the energy you have spent trying to be understood by people who never earned that access. And if someone you know is still explaining themselves to people who only drain them, send them this video. Sometimes the right message arrives at the exact moment a person is finally ready to stop betraying themselves. The next video continues this conversation and goes deeper into the patterns that keep you small, available, and easy to control. Until then, remember this. The people who deserve your truth will not make you beg to be understood. And the people who don't deserve it no longer get to live inside your explanation.